Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Drum Roll Please, Zach and EJ Talk Sports. It has been a minute since we've been here. This is our first episode of 2022, and we are super psyched to be back, and we have a very fun show for you today. We're going to be talking about early 2022 fantasy football rankings and predictions. We are going to do a new segment called, you've heard of Wreck-It Ralph. We have Fix It Zach. Zach's going to talk to us about the NBA trade deadline and what needs to be done to get a little juice going there. And we are going to wrap up with something we normally start with, which is our NFL picks. So, launching right in, Zach, great to see you back again.
Great to see you too, EJ.
Congratulations on destroying me in the fantasy playoffs this year. Zach, for many of you that don't know, upset me this year in our RMC Fantasy Playoff League. So we are going to defer to Zach when it comes to our NFL fantasy rankings. So why don't you kick me off and give me your overall thoughts on this upcoming year's NFL fantasy draft?
I think this is a great year of fantasy. It was very inconsistent, and that made it much more fun. There was not that many players besides like Cooper Kupp, who on a weekly basis produced. And Cooper Kupp is not overrated.
A retraction from our episode 1.
Yeah.
Our first hot take. Zach, Cooper Kupp, overrated.
So, looking at the QB position, it's such a well-rounded position. There's definitely like 15 guys who, if you have them on your team, you're fine with that. But in my personal opinion, my top 10 is Josh Allen, number 1, because he can get it done in the air and with his legs. Then Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Brady, if he does not retire, Aaron Rodgers, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson if he plays, Lamar Jackson, and then Matthew Stafford.
So we'll kind of go through this, and you'll give your rankings like you just did, and I'm going to kind of look to where we have the value and also where people might take a tumble. So obviously Josh Allen's not taking too much of a hit, where the fact is he may, or looks like he's probably going to lose his offensive coordinator. As a Dolphins fan and a place where his offensive coordinator is rumored to go to become the head coach, I am not a huge fan and feel that really it's Josh Allen who's really kind of propelling that offense and not the scheme or the play calling. So I'm with you. I don't think Josh Allen will lose any value with having a new OC or a new play caller. Allen, Mahomes are really your top two. I had Herbert on my team this year. He was kind of hit or miss. Don't really know what we're going to see with the Chargers. But I like Joe Burrow as well, and obviously Aaron Rodgers. Joe Burrow is where I feel there's some value, because most likely, as we've seen in fantasy drafts, guys like Allen and Mahomes are going to come off the board pretty early. People are going to jump up to take them. And then usually we have a little bit of a lull before the next big pocket of quarterbacks start to go, or you might get a guy pulled here or there, like last year when I drafted Herbert. He was in the third round, a little bit of an outlier towards the back end of the third round. But we haven't talked about Lamar Jackson. Where do you see a guy like Lamar Jackson fitting into the fantasy draft this year? I mean, obviously coming in last year, it was basically a 2 or 3 quarterback conversation. Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and then you had like Josh Allen behind him, and then it was kind of like pick 'em. Do we go Dak? Do we go things like that? But where do you see Lamar this year?
I had Lamar on my team last year, and I was big on Lamar at the beginning of the season. I kind of don't feel the same about him anymore, because he was playing good throughout the season, and then after about halfway through the season, he was injured for most of the season. When he did play, he just wasn't very effective. I feel like partially it's a lack of weapons, but also the inability to stay on the field is a big thing for me. But I would still be fine having him on my team. I feel like once the section of quarterbacks start going, once they start really coming off the board, that's when I would feel comfortable taking Lamar Jackson.
Now, I'm not really big on Kyler Murray, and I know in a lot of early mock drafts that are coming out, he, quarterback-wise, is positioning between third quarterback taken and fifth quarterback taken.
Really?
For me, I feel that's too high. I'm with you. I don't have them in any particular order, although I'd probably put Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes as 1 and 1A. After that, I would say Herbert. However, I feel like when you watch him play, Aaron Rodgers still puts up those consistent numbers, even though early in rankings like this, he's normally lower down the chart. And I think Joe Burrow has made a name for himself. And then after that, then I would probably put Kyler and Lamar. Somebody else who we haven't even mentioned and who definitely has taken a big tumble is Russell Wilson. I think most people have realized that he's the best quarterback in the league for the first 6 weeks of the season, and then after that he vanishes. But will he be on a new team? Will that help him? And then another interesting quarterback this year is Jalen Hurts, because Jalen Hurts was one of the top fantasy scoring quarterbacks last year. But as we got towards the end of the season, especially in the playoffs, a lot of the holes in his game were exposed. So does the league catch up to him, or does he, come out this year and show more growth, and thus, actually propelling to having a lot of fantasy value?
I feel like for Jalen Hurst this season, he didn't have a bad season, but he did not have a phenomenal or a great season. He had a good season. It's what you want to see out of a starting quarterback, but it's not like he was showing that he was definitely the face of the franchise. But fantasy-wise, that good season translated into an amazing fantasy season, and that's who Jalen Hurts really is. I feel like for next season, Jalen Hurts is going to improve, but fantasy-wise, I don't see him being in the top tier of quarterbacks.
And then for me, I'll give like 3 wild card quarterbacks, and we're going to leave the college draft alone because we don't know who's going where and who's going to be named starter. But if we're just looking at the landscape as it is now, my 3 wild cards will be Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, and Jameis Winston. I'm not going to put Zach Wilson from the Jets in that just yet, although he definitely could be a wild card. But those 3 guys, Winston, Fields, and Lawrence, both, you can make an argument that you see a lot of upside for all of them. And also we turn around and with Fields and Lawrence, who are going into their second year, with now both of them like new offensive systems.
Yeah.
So 2 years in the NFL, 2 different offensive systems, don't know what you're going to get, but they could surprise you. And they both have a lot of talent. They both showed flashes last year. And then obviously Jameis, same thing. I mean, he's not a rookie. Sometimes plays like it, but he's not a rookie. But was looking pretty sharp with the Saints. Had some big games, but then had the injury. So those are 3 guys that, to me, could be a backup to start the year for you, but then end up, halfway or 3/4 of the way through the year, finding that they acquired a hot hand. What are your thoughts on those 3 guys?
I feel like for Jameis Winston, I've always been a Jameis Winston fan, but I feel like at this point, you know what you're getting from Jameis Winston. So I feel like if you're a good team like the Saints were supposed to be this year, you feel somewhat comfortable having Jameis as your starter because he'll make big plays. He'll also make big mistakes. Fantasy-wise, I just don't feel like I want to have the ups and downs of Jameis Winston on my team, so I want to take him. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields are both interesting because Trevor Lawrence was terrible. He was awful this year. And some people can call him a bust already. I don't think you can do that. It's his first year. Not everyone can come in like Justin Herbert and be a total stud as soon as they come into the league. And I feel like he was under Urban Meyer. It obviously wasn't a good culture, good system, anything. I feel like he'll bounce back, but I don't know how much he'll improve. It's interesting. A wild card's the right word for it. And I'm big on Justin Fields. He just missed my top 10 because this year under Matt Nagy, terrible system. Yeah. But still, some games he had great games. He showed for me more potential than any of the other rookie QBs.
Well, let's jump over to another fun position to talk about that has tons and tons of talent. Let's go to our running backs.
So for the running backs, I think next year it's not going to be Derrick Henry or Jonathan Taylor as the number 1 running back. That is Nick Chubb. Then at number 2...
Hot take right there. That is a very hot take.
Then at number 2, I have Derrick Henry. Number 3, Jonathan Taylor. Number 4, I have Naji Harris. Number 5, Dalvin Cook. Number 6, Joe Mixon. Number 7, Austin Eckler. Number 8, Alvin Kamara. Number 9, McCaffrey. McCaffrey's at 9 because he can't stay on the field. If he plays, you're telling me McCaffrey's going to play 17 games next season, he's in the top 3. And then at number 10 was tough, but I decided to go with a guy who I think has a lot of upside to totally break out next year after a good rookie season, Trifante Williams.
Yeah, I can't argue with Trifante Williams. I do take a little bit of issue with the top. I think that Jonathan Taylor has to go number 1. You can't pass him up just based off everything he's done. I agree though with some of what you're saying. To me though, where I'm seeing in a lot of drafts, the next 2 backs to follow Taylor are Henry and Cook, and that's really where I take issue because I think Mixon has definitely demonstrated enough, and that offense has demonstrated enough to put him up into RB 2 or 3 coming off the board. Eckler is another one. He's always so quiet, not a flashy name or a flashy player, but just compiles a lot of numbers. Naji Harris.
Yeah.
Now, I had Nick Chubb on my team this year. I traded for Nick Chubb, acquired him halfway through the year. Had Dalvin Cook on my team. I've gotten burned 2 times by Dalvin Cook. He just has a hard time staying healthy. With Nick Chubb, I don't necessarily understand his usage. And that's what's getting me, especially down the stretch this past year. When you're watching the Browns and you're saying, why aren't they just handing the ball to Chubb? It was the way that he was being utilized and his actual lack of being utilized that sometimes scares me with Nick Chubb. And then also when Kareem Hunt's in that lineup, he can vulture a lot of his carries as well. And then, they also have, several receivers and a decent short intermittent passing game with if they keep Mayfield the way that Mayfield plays. But I would say that backs like McCaffrey and Henry and maybe even Cook have the ability this year to take the biggest tumble in drafts. Like they're the guys that I see moving. To me, the riser, like you said, clear cut Trifante Williams. Saquon has all but disappeared. Fantasy drafts, and people that we're not talking about as well are guys, like Elliott from the Cowboys as well, who I think that Pollard has a really good chance of usurping him in carry. So Pollard's another one for me that is a back to watch, and I think, during the draft, Pollard, Swift, Kamara, these are backs that, may tumble a little bit because people may be quick to grab a Trifante Williams or a Naji Harris. That I think there's a lot of value. And also, we haven't even mentioned a back like Aaron Jones, who looks like he could be the 15th back taken off the board. So very, very interesting this year going in with where a lot of these running backs fall. But I'm with you. I think there's a lot of value to be found in backs like Eckler and Mixon, Javonte Williams, DeAndre Swift, Michael Carter from the Jets, who I like, and I think he's by the end of the year established himself as the clear RB1 in New York. So yeah, those are my top guys. Any pitfalls or anybody in running back wise that you feel should be a back to stay away from?
I would obviously, you could say Saquon, but I feel like most people know that. I would stay far away from Ezekiel Elliott this season because for the last 2 years, he just hasn't been the same explosive player that he was before when he was the rushing champion and so on. I just feel like I've always been a big Tony Pollard guy, and in his limited carries, he's still outproducing Zeke, I feel like. I don't know if that's statistic-wise, but watching the game, you're like, why isn't Tony Pollard the running back one? I think this year, especially with Zeke, and I think he comes out a bit flat like he has the last few years. I think the Cowboys are going to realize it's time to give Tony Pollard the running back.
Yeah, there's definitely, to me, I think where a lot of people are going to win their fantasy drafts is when you get around, RB 18, when you start looking at where, that what they call that fourth tier of running back, which right now is looking like the fourth tier of running back is Saquon, Elijah Mitchell, Edwards-Helaire,
Miles Sanders,
Playoff Lenny, James Conner, Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, A.J. Dillon are your fourth tier. You start looking at some of these names in the fifth tier, you see guys like Miles Sanders, James Robinson, Michael Carter, Kareem Hunt. So there's some names in there that, I would say that you might be able to, not buy into the hype of this fourth tier and even late third tier where it's, you're looking at J.K. Dobbins, like you said, Zeke Elliott, and you might be able to find some value in that fifth tier. And for guys that can either be patient or, get some of these guys and not get forced into having to take a Leonard Fournette, based off where he's slotted, could absolutely be the difference this year in a lot of people's fantasy drafts. I think one of the most interesting positions, and definitely a position that is over the last couple of years been growing in depth, and will have some controversy for sure with where players are taken, is the wide receiver position. So what are your thoughts on the wide receiver position this year?
For the wide receiver position, I really, really didn't want to put Cooper Kupp number 1, but I ended up doing that. Cooper Kupp is not the best receiver in football. He's probably top 5, but he's not the best receiver in football. But fantasy-wise, he definitely is. It's going to be the same quarterback, same system, Cooper Kupp. And he won the Triple Crown. He had a phenomenal season, I think. Maybe not the same level of dominance next year, but he'll definitely be up there with the receivers. Then number 2, I have someone who was on my team this year, Justin Jefferson. He's the best. His statistics weren't amazing this year. They were very good. They were near the top of the league. He didn't have a groundbreaking season, but I think next year, with Adam Thielen missing some games, he was being double teamed most of the time. I think next year he's just going to come out and he's going to totally ball out. If Kirk Cousins is still the QB, you don't know. If there's changes, they're obviously going to have a new coach. Right. So we'll see, but I think Justin Jefferson. Number 3, the best receiver in football, Davante Adams. He might be higher. You just don't know where he'll be playing next year. Jamar Chase is 4. Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Smith, and Keenan Allen.
Well, I'm interested with where you slotted Deebo. Because Deebo, to me, right now is showing himself to be the best skilled position player in football. And he's basically playing 2 positions. He's running the ball and he's running routes as a receiver. So, and obviously he's listed as a receiver. So you get a lot of value. To me, Deebo is almost the equivalent of what fantasy owners were getting out of Lamar Jackson, where you were kind of getting a quarterback and a running back in one player. Mm-hmm. Deebo brings that to the table here. I'm not in love with the top tier of wide receivers. Yes, Cooper Kupp, as you said, probably, if most people are going by the chalk, will be the first wide receiver off the board. I can live without making that pick, especially depending on what running backs might be on the board still at that point.
Like
in time.
Naji Harris and Joe Mixon.
2 and 3, seem to fluctuate between Davante Adams, who's definitely going to be Aaron Rodgers dependent. I mean, if you saw that one game that Jordan Love played, you know that there's going to be a huge drop off in offensive productivity.
Well, most likely, if he leaves Green Bay, he'll have a better quarterback than Jordan Love.
Yeah, so there's a lot to say about Davante Adams, his future, and what his productivity would be. And then, fluctuating with him was your guy Justin Jefferson, who has passed Thielen and is the clear-cut number 1 in that offense. To me, the best receiver is Jamar Chase, and he's number 1, which is why I could let those guys pass and take a Jamar Chase, or right behind him a Tyreek Hill, and then in that same group you have Stephon Diggs and Deebo Samuel. So those are my actual top 4 players.
Really?
Wide receivers, absolutely.
So you would take Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill over Cooper Kupp?
I would not draft Cooper Kupp.
But if it comes down to it, and there's 2 receivers available, right, and you're going to take receiver.
Yes.
And it's Stephon Diggs and Cooper Kupp, you would take Stephon Diggs.
I would take Stephon Diggs. I would take Stephon Diggs over Cooper Kupp. I would take Tyreek Hill over Cooper Kupp. I would take Jamar Chase over Cooper Kupp. I would take Deebo Samuel over Cooper Kupp.
And you're taking all of them over Justin Jefferson and Davante Adams.
I could live with either player in that situation. So, if I was slotted and Davante fell to me at that point, again, depends on what we know at that time when we're drafting, which most likely would be late August, where he is, who his quarterback will be. Justin Jefferson, I would draft Justin Jefferson, yes. Would I draft him over Jamar Chase? Probably not. Would I draft him over Tyreek Hill? I probably would draft him over Tyreek Hill. Would I draft him over Stephon Diggs? Yes. Would I draft him over Deebo Samuel? Probably not. Now, an interesting guy for me is where we start getting down to back-end tier 2, front-end tier 3, and we have big names like CeeDee Lamb, DK Metcalf, and DeAndre Hopkins, who were guys at the absolute top, for the most part, of the receiving chart. My issue with my issue with CeeDee is he has a ton of talent, and he is by far the most explosive offensive weapon Dallas has.
Yeah.
But Dak likes to throw to Amari. He also likes to throw to Gallup.
And CD had a few big drops in that.
CD is drop prone, and they just spread that ball. Kellen Moore, they just spread that ball around so much, and I just don't know if there's necessarily the touches that there are for other receivers in an offense. When you see the Bengals tighten down, that ball's going to Chase. All you have to do is watch that battle between the Bills and the Chiefs to know that Mahomes threw to nobody but Kelsey and Tyreek when it mattered. So there's certain times that these players seem to separate themselves, and as wide receivers, those are the guys you want that are going to get the big looks in the big spots, are the clear-cut number ones. When you get a guy that's supposed to be your number one, like a CD, but he's not necessarily even a clear-cut number one in that offense, but has wide receiver number one potential, you can get burned. And I got burned, where I'd have big games from CD, and then I'd have CD putting up nothing. A guy like A.J. Brown's another one, where he would pop off for these big games, but then he'd be injured, or the ball would get spread around, or it'd be games where, King Henry took over. So for a wide receiver, for me, it's tough because I want the guy that's going to get the looks consistently, game in and out. And Chase kind of showed to be that guy. That Burrow, when he dropped back, was going to Chase.
It's interesting that you say that because a number 2, who I consider a top 15 receiver for fantasy next year, is T. Higgins. T. Higgins again this year. The only part of my team that I liked was my receiver core, and that was Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins. T. Higgins, while a lot of the targets go to Jamar Chase when it matters, if Jamar Chase is being doubled, they have Boyd, Higgins, and Mixon. And that's how that offense becomes so explosive, because they have playmakers all over the field. And I feel like Higgins isn't going to be the number 1 target, but if a play breaks down, Burrow looks for Higgins, because if Jamar Chase isn't there, I feel like Higgins is the best wide receiver 2 in the league.
Right.
It's not particularly close. I feel like he can have big games like he had in the playoffs against, I forgot who I was playing, but he had a 50-point game in the playoffs or something like that.
This is, you're talking about fantasy playoffs and T. Higgs game.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had that game against my guys.
Yeah.
When he was playing for your team. But again, just like with the running backs, to me, what's interesting, and I feel where a lot of fantasy drafts can be won, is we look at the back end of, or let's look at tier 3, for example, where a lot of people are now placing wide receivers in tier 3. So the general consensus for tier 3 wide receivers right now are guys like DK, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson, Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas, and T. Higgins, right? Those are your main guys. But then I start looking at the players that are behind them, and we got guys that would still be on the board, like Tyler Lockett, Jalen Waddle, Godwin, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, Devontae Smith, Michael Pittman. And these are guys that also are clear-cut number ones in their offense. Michael Pittman had a fantastic year. I, like a fool, dropped him after the 3rd week of the season, and he was picked up by somebody else and went off to have an amazing year. But there's a lot of value, again, in these tier 4 or 5. So for me, going into this fantasy draft right now, I feel like the vibe is going to be patience.
Yeah.
Guys that can, managers that can sit back and wait and find value in those tier 4 and tier 5 guys, especially, as people start to jump up, because everybody likes to get on the back end of those runs. Somebody drafts a tight end, all of a sudden tight ends start coming off the board. Somebody drafts a quarterback, all of a sudden quarterbacks, and those runs. So for guys that can stay patient and find those values in tier 4 or 5, I think is really going to make a big difference this year. Because, most people aren't going to pass on the flash. But then you start getting down to tier 3, which is essentially last year's big names. That didn't produce. They fall. So now you start gambling. Are they going to return to form or are they not? But that still pushes down guys that most of the time are still early in their career or coming up or consistent producers that just don't either have the flashy name or, don't get the flashy highlights. So that's kind of my vibe.
It's interesting you're talking about draft strategy because last year I took Travis Kelce with my first pick. And it wasn't a bad pick. Travis Kelce, who had a good season, an inconsistent season. But I wouldn't take a tight end super high again. But it's interesting because tight end is probably the position with the most depth out of everyone. Looking at 10 tight ends, I was like, this guy's going to be my top 10 tight ends. And there's probably 10 good tight ends. And then you look at that, if you don't have another one, you're like really going 50-50. Will they have a good game? And that's if they get a touchdown. Or will they really have nothing? But if you look at the top 10 tight ends, you'll have to get the better ones, you'll have to take them pretty early. And I don't know if you really want to do that, because there's always the chance they won't produce, almost like Kelce did this year.
A lot of people got burned probably with Waller and Kittle that way this year. And even Mark Andrews to an extent.
Well, Mark Andrews had an amazing season.
Yeah, but I feel like where he was going, I feel a lot of people where they drafted him probably felt they didn't get the value from that. Because, yeah, I mean, statistically, having great years is one thing, but what you passed on in your draft or what was still on the board to
when
get
you
that.
took the tight end.
Right. And, I mean, I feel like, with tight ends, there's no, real conversation to be had. Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle, Waller, Pitts, or whatever order you want to put them in, are your top 5.
I have a different top 5.
What is your top 5?
I have Mark Andrews number 1. He was the number 1 tight end last year.
Okay.
He'll be again this year. Lamar Jackson, he's his top target. Then Travis Kelce, then Kyle Pitts. I feel like that's the top 3 it should be. Then we have George Kittle, who's arguably the best tight end in football. Fantasy-wise, is not that great because you can't measure blocking fantasy-wise.
And he doesn't stay on the field.
Yeah. And then number 5, instead of Darren Waller, who could not stay on the field last year, I have T.J. Hawkinson.
Okay.
I'm a big T.J. Hawkinson guy. I think the Lions will improve next year, and I think T.J. Hawkinson will have a good season. Not in like a groundbreaking season, but he'll get in the end zone. Then I have Darren Waller. Then I have Dalton Schultz on the Cowboys. I played Dalton Schultz late in the season. Mm-hmm. He kind of burned me. He's a good player. The Cowboys offense is kind of like the bit worse version of the Bengals offense. Mm-hmm. They can beat you in so many ways. Then I have Dawson Knox, your guy. Dawson Knox is good. Big offense. Pretty much the same thing as Dalton Schultz. Then I have Mike Gesicki. Then I have Dallas Goedert. That last tier, after Waller, it really drops off. Because those last 4 are good players. But all 4 of those are pretty much touchdown dependent.
There's value to be had. And I think it just kind of really boils down to a little bit of luck, because I can, outside of, say, for example, the big 5, you got guys like Knox, Hunter Henry, Freiermuth, Fant, Schultz, Ertz, and then you're gonna have people like Tanyan coming back, who was a top target for Aaron Rodgers and a guy that Aaron Rodgers did like to throw to. Evan Ingram, who I like, for the Giants, had basically a year where he kind of vanished from everywhere. Mm-hmm. Where do we go with O.J. Howard and Gronk at the position? So for the most part, to me, I feel there is a lot of value down low to be had. Will it be a big name or a guy that's going to put up Travis Kelce type numbers? No, but there's definitely some serviceable tight ends that you can get later in the draft if the opportunity presents itself to move up and get another running back that you wanted or another wide receiver that's sitting there to bolster your lineup, and not feel like because the big 5 came off the board, you have to run and grab a Hawkinson or a Goddard. You might be able to wait and grab a Knox later on, a Henry, a Freiermuth, an Ertz, a Tanyan, and get a very quality tight end. So again, we talk about strategy, and it feels like when I'm looking over this early draft and mock rankings and everything else right now, that patience is going to be a huge part of the draft strategy, and finding the value, looking for the best available player when we start getting into that tier 3 through 5 range. Like where can we get the best value? And truthfully, some luck. Mm-hmm. Whoever guesses and gets the right guy, the hot guy for that, is definitely going to be well out, because that's where the draft is usually won.
Yeah, because if you look at last year, like I drafted as my starting running backs, I took Miles Sanders and Troy Sermon.
Right.
And Miles Sanders was good at the end of the season, but for most of the season, Miles Sanders was non-existent. He was like the running back 3 in the offense. Gainwell, Boston Scott were getting more snaps than him. And then Troy Sermon didn't play the whole year. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. You didn't know anything about that when you drafted, so there was no way to avoid that. And then you look at luck, like no one drafted Eli Mitchell. Whoever picked him up.
Yeah. And again, my hot take, keep an eye on C.J. Uzomah from Cincinnati. I really like him. He had some big games last year, and if you watch the playoffs, you see that Joe Burrow does like to throw to him as well, and he does great running routes. Another Cincinnati guy.
We've mentioned their whole offense so far.
You know what? I mean, it worked for people drafting Chiefs players for the last couple of
years. You guys
years.
might know who we're picking later with the NFL picks.
All right, well, let's move on to a new fun segment that we have called Fix It, Zach. I have this wheel right here. We have listed some NFL teams. I am going to give this wheel as best and strong of a spin as I possibly can, and whatever team it lands on, Your job is to put on your GM hat and tell our listening audience how you would fix this team. So, we have the Jags, the Steelers, the Ravens, the Dolphins, the Lions, and the Jets.
A good mix of terrible teams and teams that are in an interesting scenario.
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Make sure I don't flip your water bottle. And
Ooh, that's a good spin.
we got the Steelers.
The Steelers are in an interesting situation because Big Ben just retired. And before I do this, this is a disclaimer. This is unrealistically realistic. It's mostly realistic, but obviously all these moves would not be made in one offseason by a GM. So, for the Steelers, mostly I just think they need to build the O-line to build around Naji Harris. That's the main thing. Make him the number one focus in that offense and just have him go. And then let Juju walk. Juju's a good player, but Juju, I feel like, produces a lot more drama than he produces on the field. He tore an ACL last season. He wasn't really missed that much.
Right.
And since you lose Juju, I think they should then sign Mike Williams from the Chargers. The Chargers obviously wouldn't want to let him walk, but he's a free agent, and I think he would be a nice fit on this team. A deep threat to go along with Deontay and Claypool. And then trade up, because they don't have a very high pick, and draft Matt Corral. Because they need a QB. I don't like Haskins or Mason Rudolph. I don't think they're starting caliber QBs. And he would have to come in, make the throws he needs to. Mostly it's going to be a running offense. Build it almost like the Tennessee offense, where it's Henry, and when Tannehill has to make the throw, he has some good receivers to make the throw. Obviously, this isn't Tannehill, this is Corral. And then, to fix the defense. The defense doesn't need that much fixing, but they could use a corner, so I think they should sign Darius Williams as a free agent. Just a nice fit. And then they should bring back Joe Hayden and Trey Turner. Then I think they have a team that's obviously not going to cap out. They're not old. They're a young team that's going to get better, but they could definitely compete for the playoffs and maybe in the playoffs next year.
Now, if they don't draft a quarterback, are there any free agent quarterbacks or quarterbacks via trades that you would like to see the Steelers go after? Somebody that you think would be a good fit for that team?
I mean, personally, I'm not a huge Steelers guy. I don't like the Steelers. But I think there's obviously the Deshaun Watsons, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, those guys who are seemingly available. The Seahawks claimed that Russell Wilson won't be traded. But for Russell Wilson, if there's the right offer, I don't see why they wouldn't trade Russell Wilson. And if they don't draft one, I would say that. Free agent-wise, it's not a great year for quarterbacks. I mean, you could bring in one of the, journeymen. Like, someone like, I don't know if Ryan Fitzpatrick's available, but he probably is. He is every year. I mean, but I feel like you might
Well, he was eating buffalo wings and not wearing a shirt at the Buffalo playoff game.
Was he?
Yeah.
It wasn't
the
it like...
home playoff game was New England. Yep.
Oof. And so I feel like get someone who, if you should go for a rookie quarterback, I feel like, just because you have a young team, you don't want to give up your future for Aaron Rodgers, especially because with Aaron Rodgers, I don't know if this team could win right now. And but if you cannot get a young quarterback, there's obviously nothing wrong with bringing in Aaron Rodgers.
We are going to move on to the NBA trade deadline. Now, with the deadline, one thing a conversation that we were having off camera was you felt that the NBA trade deadline had no real juice or no real sizzle around it. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are, as to what can be done to help get some juice around the trade deadline, and what trades could still be out there right now that might help teams and might help spice up the trade deadline.
Yeah, so I feel like the trade deadline, it's pretty stale because like the Celtics made a trade where they acquired Bol and was it PJ Dozier? It was someone like that. Two players who aren't very good. And it was very hyped up because it was like Bol. And that's because that was like the first trade of the year. The one before that was Rajon Rondo going to yet another team. It's really, the fact that those trades were hyped up just shows how like unexciting it is. Because for the last 2 years, Jeremy Grant's been the most valuable asset at the trade deadline that all the teams want to bring in. And this is nothing against Jeremy Grant. Jeremy Grant's a very good player. Jeremy Grant was a good player on Denver, and then looked like a great player on the Pistons, and it's just because the talents that surround him, no one else is taking the ball from Jeremy Grant. I think he could help a contender, but I don't think that he should be the guy who everyone's like, I want Jeremy Grant. Because when was the last big trade that happened at the trade deadline? All the big trades are in the offseason. So I feel like the trade deadline should be a way for contenders to bolster their roster for the playoffs, like gear up for the playoffs, really get ready, add the missing piece.
Mm-hmm.
And for teams that are borderline contenders and want to go all in, they could add a big piece to go up, and then a team that's trying to sell, they can obviously give those valuable pieces up to contenders and borderline contenders. But instead, the trade line just seems like players that teams don't want just getting dumped off.
Mm-hmm.
Like a Russell Westbrook for John Wall trade. That's like, the Rockets don't want John Wall, the Lakers don't want Russell Westbrook. So it's not like, oh, I want John Wall. It's just like, I'm getting rid of this player. Obviously, there's some players like John Collins might be available. There's some like good players, but these players should be players that are like good players to acquire, not the players which are like the prizes of the trade deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for this to happen, there should be, I don't know what the rule would specifically be, but some rule which prevents all of the trades happening in the offseason. Because the offseason, it's crazy. All the free agent signings and all the trades are happening like repetitive. Like Kawhi Leonard signed with the Clippers, Paul George got traded there. That was so exciting. Nothing like that happens at the trade deadline, and it just seems like, oh, the trade deadline just passed. Right. So I think there should be some changes to make the trade deadline a more fun part of the season. Because NBA fans love making like mock trades for their teams to get better. The Celtics fans, I do that. As a Celtics fan, I do that a lot because we're kind of terrible. And I feel like it would be much more fun if like the teams could really realistically add a really good player.
All right, so now we are on to the best part of the show, the part with the fun and the sizzle, which is our NFL, AFC, and NFC predictions. We are going to try to hop on again and do a special before the Super Bowl, but just in case we don't, we are going to give our Super Bowl predictions too. So, we start first with the AFC Championship Game, played at 3:05 p.m., in Kansas City, where the Bengals will be visiting the Chiefs. Who do you got, and what do you like?
This game's really tough to pick, because originally, after last weekend, I thought the Chiefs, there's no one to beat them here. Out of the 4 teams left, the Chiefs will just roll through their competition. But then I got to think about it. The Chiefs went through a very long, very tough game, especially on their defense. Their legs they're going to be tired. Their legs aren't going to be very fresh. And the Bengals, while they came down to a game-winning field goal, it was a much less tiring game. They were playing the Titans. They didn't get like 40 points dropped on them. I feel like their legs are going to be a bit fresher. And then it's just going to come down to a shootout and who's going to get more stops. And while the Chiefs' defense is a bit better, I think the Bengals will come up and make the stops when they need to. And Joe Burrow, their offense has so many weapons. They almost have more weapons than the Chiefs because they have 3 receivers who can beat you, a running back better than the Chiefs. Their tight end's obviously worse. Their QB is almost on the same level. And because of that, I'm taking the Bengals to win in a shootout.
I'm rooting for the Bengals.
Mm-hmm.
The only stat that I'll give that concerns me regarding this game is that the Chiefs average 28 points a game. The Bengals consistently give up 22 points a game. And we also saw that last week that the Bengals have a very, very, very hard time protecting Joe Burrow. So while I'm going to be personally rooting for Cincinnati, I feel the toughest part for them is going to be keeping pace with Kansas City's offense, who puts up about 28 points a game. Now, to the Bengals' credit, they put up 27 points a game. So their offenses are neck and neck. But it's just about whether or not the Bengals can stop the Chiefs enough and protect Joe Burrow.
Especially with like Chris Jones. Chris Jones is like making an impact right now.
So while I'm rooting for the Bengals, if I'm laying money on the line right now, I am picking the Chiefs. Okay, so on to the Rams versus Niners, which I think is an NFC Championship game that nobody saw coming. This game will be played at 6 p.m., and LA will be hosting it. So, who do you like in this one?
This one, as you said, it's incredibly unlikely. The Rams people could have seen them making it here, they did have two very tough opponents in the Cardinals and the Bucks, and the Bucks are the defending champs. A lot of people probably picked them in that game. And the Niners, serious, they made a year because Dak Prescott didn't know to give the refs the ball.
Right.
And because Aaron Rodgers and the Packers choked away their amazing season like they have for the past 5 years. And so, in this one, while the Niners have the momentum, I just think the Rams are the better team. They have the defense to combat the Niners' amazing rush attack. I don't think Jimmy G is going to beat them. Then on offense, you saw it against the Buccaneers. Whatever they wanted to, especially near that late game scenario, they could just get Cooper Kupp the ball. Matt Stafford wasn't missing throws. Cooper Kupp literally dropped a guy the guy fell into the sideline. Cooper Kupp just dropped him there and then just took him the next play, took him deep, put him in field goal range.
Right.
And because of that, I'm taking the Rams. I don't think it'll be a close one.
So it's very tough when you look at the tail of the tape here, and the Rams have lost 6 straight to the Niners, and McVay hasn't gotten past Shanahan yet. It's very tough as when you listen to NFL analysts after NFL analysts. I haven't played in the NFL, so I can't say it personally, but they all say it's extremely difficult to beat a team 3 times in the same season. The Rams are home. However, I don't know how much of an advantage that'll be because Niner fans travel, and that area is also has a very strong Niners root, which is why the Rams were going out of their way this week to try to limit the sale of playoff tickets to Niners fans. 2 of Matthew Stafford's lowest rated games this year have been against the Niners, so that doesn't bode well. Cooper Kupp hasn't really had a game where he has gone off against the Niners this year. However, the Niners have struggled recently in the red zone. Jimmy G has a host of ailments. I feel like, for me, this game is going to come down to what happens in the first half. If the Rams jump out to a big lead, and they've been outscoring their opponents by 52 points in the last 3 games in the first half, it's going to be very difficult for Niners to come back because that's not the kind of football they play. But if the Niners can keep it close, and the Niners can keep their running game intact and push for things to go down to the wire, then in that situation, I like San Francisco. I am not inclined right now to bet against San Francisco. So I am going to pick San Francisco to win.
Really?
So I have a rematch, a Super Bowl rematch from 2 years ago with the Chiefs and the Niners, and with the same outcome, the Chiefs, I think, are going to win.
Except maybe by a lot more points this time.
Again this year. And you have a Bengals-Rams Super Bowl, which would be an extremely fun Super Bowl and not one that I would complain about at all. And who do you have winning that contest?
In that specific Super Bowl, I am most definitely taking the Rams because you mentioned the Bengals' inability to protect Joe Burrow. That might be a problem going against Aaron Donald in that Rams D-line. And then I feel like, once again, the Bengals defense, I was saying they'd beat the Chiefs in a shootout. With the Rams defense, I don't see them putting up as much points, and their defense is not stopping that Rams offense for very long, for that many drives. So I feel like the Rams win. Might be close, but it won't come down to a game-winning play. I think the Rams kind of walk away with it.
All right, so you heard it here first. Rams, your 2022 Super Bowl champion, according to Zach. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been another super fun episode. Sorry we couldn't get to 2 spins of the wheel. Maybe next time, but Zach did tell us how to fix the Steelers. So all you Steelers fans out there, rest assured there is a recipe on how to fix your team. All right, everybody, thanks so much, and until next time, see you then.